Calls for the arrest of South Korea's impeached former president as protesters rally once again. Hello and welcome. I'm Peter Dobby. You're watching Al Jazeera live from our headquarters here in Doha. Also ahead. The United Nations warns the world is facing its worst humanitarian crisis in 70 years, with 20 million people at risk of starvation, many in conflict zones. A new life for hundreds of former child soldiers in the Philippines. Plus,
I'm Catherine Soy in northern Kenya, where one of our oldest human ancestors was discovered 3 decades ago. I'll be telling you what people around here are saying about him.
OK, let's kick off this half hour with some live pictures coming to us out of Seoul. What you're going to be looking at right now are pictures of people who are against the impeached President Park Geun-hye in South Korea. They are calling for her now to be arrested for a second day. Thousands of people in Seoul. They're also protesting over her dismissal from office following that corruption scandal involving politicians and major companies. She was forced out on Friday after judges unanimously upheld the parliamentary decision to have her impeached. We'll stay with these pictures. We'll also talk to our correspondent Rob McBride, who joins us live. Rob, give us a sense of how many people are on the streets this hour.
That's right. Well, thousands, Peter. We are into the weekend here, which typically is when we get these pro and against park demonstrations coming out onto the streets as this constitutional crisis has unfolded. And this weekend is no different, despite this ruling. Just a little less than a kilometre from where we are here, they have been staging the pro-park rally. That is now winding down. Understandably, we have been down there, and the mood is one of anger and defiance, but also tinged, I think, with a feeling of defeat. There is a feeling that this is now a done deal. There's no way of overturning it. Although, interestingly, one of Park's more outspoken attorneys has been quoted as saying that this decision should actually be overturned. It seems impossible that that will take place, and the reason is behind me here. This is where the crowds that have turned out every week calling for this impeachment typically turn up for their evening vigil and music concert, and as we get into the evening here, that's what we are now seeing, to see the crowds build up again. At the peak of this movement, up to 2 million people have been gathering here. We're not expecting those kind of numbers today, but certainly there's no way that the people engaged in this campaign are going to allow this impeachment not to stand. We are, interestingly, probably expecting this maybe to be the last mass demonstration of this pro-impeachment campaign. The people have largely achieved what they wanted to, but also we're now getting into a campaign period for electing a new president, and there are very strict rules on the type of rallies you can hold in the streets here in Seoul. Peter?
When this all kicked off a few months back, Rob, there was a distinct feeling that the president was trying to stay above it. Is it now feeling inside the country as if she's not actually trying to stay above it, she's actually hiding away from it?
That has been one of the criticisms right from the start, is her lack of comment, almost a radio silence, and that has continued, and alarmingly so. Since the decision was announced more than 24 hours ago now, there has been nothing from her, and that is very disconcerting here, and it's adding to this mood of uncertainty and also tension in the streets here. It was expected that maybe she could have made some sort of televised address, even just a written statement to say that she accepted this decision, but there has been nothing. And out on the streets there are a lot of very angry people, especially some of the demonstrators who supported the pro-park demonstrators. There have been angry clashes. There was violence yesterday. 2 people sadly died, and you do hear some very extreme views from some of the more extreme elements among them. Wild calls for the threats to the judges, for example, even some people calling for a return of martial law. Now, no one seriously expects any of that is going to happen, but until we hear from Park herself that, yes, she doesn't like this decision, but she accepts it, then that uncertainty continues here, Peter.
Rob, you'll keep us right up to date, I'm sure. In the meantime, thank you. Now, the United Nations has warned that the world is facing its worst humanitarian crisis in 70 years. It says a staggering 20 million people are at risk of starvation and famine. 4 countries directly affected: Yemen, South Sudan, Somalia and Nigeria. Now, this is all the result of years of conflict and drought. The UN is appealing for $4.4 billion in aid to deal with the crisis.
We stand at a critical point in our history. Already at the beginning of the year, we are facing the largest humanitarian crisis since the creation of the United Nations. Now, more than 20 million people across 4 countries face starvation and famine. Without collective and coordinated global efforts, people will simply starve to death. Many more will suffer and die from disease. Children stunted and out of school. Livelihoods, futures and hope will be lost. Communities' resilience rapidly wilting away. Development gains reversed. Many will be displaced and will continue to move in search for survival, creating ever more instability across entire regions. The warning call and appeal for action by the Secretary-General can thus not be understated.
Well, over the past few days, our correspondents have been observing the crisis on the ground in Somalia, South Sudan and Nigeria. Many of the disasters are a convergence of conflict, with conditions which can cause famine in peacetime.
This is the Liban camp for internally displaced Somalis in the town of Baidoa. People sleeping and cooking on dirt because it's better than what they left behind. In the past few weeks, more than 200 families have come here from other parts of Somalia because they've run out of food back home. They're living outside in makeshift tents. The temperatures in early March are already above 30 degrees Celsius. This is not the way any family wants to raise their children.
Nyalopour has got used to hunger. She says all she wants now is to get enough food to keep her 4-year-old grandchild Pok alive. Tens of thousands of people have gathered here to be registered to receive humanitarian assistance. Many of them say they have lost family members to hunger as they made the journey, crossing swamps and surviving on leaves.
The camp is home to 21,000 other displaced people living in difficult conditions. The food stores here are nearly empty, and distribution is now on a monthly basis. Aid agencies warn that 200 people, mainly children, could die every day unless they receive urgent food aid. Most of them live in hard-to-reach areas, but many others live in camps like this.
People here at the Bekasi camp said there was never enough food to go around. The government is investigating how truckloads of food items disappeared before they reached those in need. And some say the situation is made difficult by a lack of information from governmental and non-governmental agencies on how they deliver aid.
The huge gap between UN funds and humanitarian needs is affecting its aid operation in Niger, where thousands of Malian refugees are suffering shortages of food and basic services. They say they're losing hope of returning home as violence in their country drags on. Mohamed Val has more.
They're queuing for medical care. The makeshift clinic in this camp is small, under-equipped and overwhelmed. Malnutrition and severe weather have made worse the health conditions of Malian refugees here. Medicine is in short supply, and so are adequate equipment and qualified doctors. Intekan refugee camp is in the remote desert area of northern Niger. It has about 20,000 refugees. Across the country, the total number is estimated at 60,000. They arrived here in 2012 after fighting began between Malian government forces and armed groups in the north. But what they thought would be a short stay is slowly becoming a permanent situation.
We have no idea when we will return. Whenever we thought we might be about to return, there was a sudden deterioration of security. We have lost any hope.
Not only medicine, but also food and water supplies are scarce here. The World Food Programme and UNHCR say they've had to reduce their aid because they don't have enough money.
We've continued to host more and more Malian refugees with funds which shrank by 20 to 30% every year. And this may continue as the situation in Mali isn't getting any better and the refugees are not ready to return. This means we now need a new type of funds, what we call development funds. This will allow the refugees to remain in Niger and to be integrated with the local population. So these funds will be used on education, economic activities, etc.
And until that happens, there's almost no economic life or education for Malians in this camp. The makeshift school is overcrowded, the students look miserable, the lack of facilities is clear. The UN's cultural body UNESCO was in charge of this school before it ended its commitment last year. Hundreds of children, especially among older boys, have been left in the streets, turning into easy recruits for armed groups. Mali signed a peace agreement with rebels in the north in 2015, but it still hasn't been implemented. Meanwhile, these refugees are concerned the world might forget about them and the conflict that drove them out of their homeland. Mohammed Fall, Aljazeera.
Now, there have been some major developments in Syria's almost 6-year-long conflict. For the first time in 4 years, President Bashar al-Assad's forces have reached the Euphrates River from the west, securing the water supply for Aleppo. The armed group ISIL has been attacking that area. On the eastern front, Kurdish Arab SDF fighters, backed by the US, have made advances against ISIL in Raqqa, the group's self-proclaimed capital. Turkish troops are nearby, supporting Free Syrian Army rebels against Assad's forces near Manbij. The presidents of Turkey and Russia are meeting to discuss their strategies in Syria. Live now to Natasha Ghanim, who's live for us on the Turkey-Syria border. Natasha, how significant is Manbij here?
Peter, Manbij is, as you mentioned, a city in the north, and it's considered a gateway to the east. You have all these various factions in and around Manbij, and they hope to make a push to the east, where, of course, ISIL has its stronghold of Raqqa and Deir ez-Zor. Those are the two largest cities it controls in eastern Syria. This week, we saw the U.S. deploy 400 additional troops to the area. The hope is, according to the colonel there, is that they'll be there for a temporary amount of time, that they're there only to boost its fighters, its Kurdish fighters, as part of the U.S.-backed coalition there. And it has, Peter, two goals. In the long term, the colonel says it's to expedite the defeat of ISIL in Raqqa, but in the short term, it's to keep the peace, because there are right now various factions of the U.S.-backed coalition, the Turkish-backed coalition, and Syrian government forces. And the U.S.-backed coalition and the Turkish-backed coalition are at a bit at odds with one another. Turkey would very much like to cooperate with the United States in any push toward Raqqa, but it disapproves of the fact that there are members, Kurdish members of a group called the YPG, which it views as an extension of another group that it deems a terrorist group. So there's not a lot of cooperation at the moment. And in fact, this week, the Turkish military says that it killed 71 Kurdish fighters. And by the way, before you ask me another question, I have lost my IFB.
Yep, we were aware of that, Natasha. Good to talk to you, though. We'll talk to you later. Comms problems, live tally, never mind. Still ahead here on Al Jazeera.
People saying they've had no food. Many don't know where their family members are. It is an unimaginable scale of human tragedy, what is unfolding here.
Thousands are fleeing the fighting in Mosul. We'll hear some of their stories. Plus,
I'm Andrew Thomas at a racetrack for souped-up cars near Brisbane. I'll be explaining why Australian voters, too, are turning towards the political extremes.
Weather updates brought to you by Qatar Airways. Going places together.
Hello and welcome to your international weather forecast. Now, across Europe, we've got this complex area of low pressure across southeastern areas, giving some very unsettled weather here. High pressure across more central parts, and then frontal systems pushing in from the west. Quite mild air here at the moment. See temperatures of 22 in Madrid and well on into the teens across France and the United Kingdom. So those southeastern areas still seeing some heavy rain across parts of Greece and into Turkey. Turkey particularly seeing some heavy rain. That continues as we head on through into Sunday. But at that stage, across the Balkans and Greece, weather conditions should be improving. Central parts of the Mediterranean, in fact, looking pretty good at the moment. Relatively mild air across Ukraine up into Russia. And then we'll see a frontal system bringing slightly cooler weather as we head on through the day on Sunday, and cooler conditions feeding their way into the Iberian Peninsula too. On the other side of the Mediterranean, generally fine, bit of a breeze coming off the Mediterranean, and a few showers along the coast of both Libya and Egypt, but it should be fine in Cairo with temperatures of 24 degrees. As we head into central parts of Africa, we've got some big showers across DR Congo towards Gabon, 1 or 2 showers across West Africa too, but it should be fine in Accra, Ghana, and for southern portions of the continent, largely fine. Sunshine in Cape Town, highs here of 22.
Weather updates brought to you by Qatar Airways. Going places together.
The media are the story.
Headlines and images and words all marry together in this magical way.
Politicians know it.
The legal precedents established under Barack Obama will make it easier for Donald Trump to jail those responsible for the story.
And the journalists also know it.
First time that a journalist was made a criminal for doing his job.
The Listening Post chronicles the saga, at this time on Al Jazeera.
Welcome back. You're with Al Jazeera live from Doha. My name's Peter Dobby. Top stories. Opponents of South Korea's impeached president are demanding that she should now be arrested a day after she was thrown out of office. In Seoul, thousands of people are also protesting in support of Park Geun-hye. The UN says the world is facing its worst humanitarian crisis in 70 years, with 20 million people at risk of starvation. Parts of Yemen, South Sudan, Somalia and the northeast of Nigeria directly affected. The UN says it needs $4.4 billion by July to prevent famine. US forces have been deployed near the Syrian city of Manbij to stop Turkey and American-backed Kurdish fighters from attacking each other. That as the presidents of Turkey and Russia meet to discuss cooperation on the fight against ISIL in Syria. US President Donald Trump has invited the Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas to visit Washington. Last month, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made his first visit since Trump became president. A spokesman for Abbas says the president made the official invitation to discuss ways to resume the peace process. Trump has moved away from supporting Washington's long-standing two-state solution policy, saying he would accept any peace settlement, including one state. Patty Culhane has more now from Washington, D.C.
It took about 9 hours since they talked, but we now know what the Trump administration wants the world to know about the phone call between President Donald Trump and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, saying that the President of the United States believes that peace is possible and the time has come to make a deal. So signaling to the world that the U.S. is going to once again, under this administration, get involved in trying to negotiate some sort of solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Now, Donald Trump raised a lot of eyebrows in Washington when Prime Minister of Israel Benjamin Netanyahu was visiting, and he said that he'd be up for a one-state solution if everyone was happy with that. That upended decades of American foreign policy, only to see the very following day his own ambassador to the United Nations come out and say, no, the U.S. still believes in a two-state solution. And in this readout of the phone call, another interesting point, the Trump administration says what we've heard from other administrations is that they don't believe that peace can be imposed on either side, that it needs to come from direct negotiations, that the U.S. can't impose a peace deal, but it also said that neither can one side on the other. So interesting language that we haven't heard from the Trump administration, but people have been wondering, is this president going to try and get involved? And it appears after this phone call that yes, he is. He's invited the Palestinian president to the White House in the very near future.
Iraq's ambassador to the UN says there is no evidence of chemical weapons being used in attacks in Mosul. Mohammed al-Hakim says it doesn't appear that ISIL has used chemical weapons in the city, where the group is fighting off an offensive by US-backed Iraqi forces. The UN had said 18 people, including women and children, have been treated for possible exposure to chemical agents since the beginning of the month. Well, Iraqis who've escaped the battle for Mosul have told Al Jazeera how being ruled by ISIL has destroyed their lives. At least 60,000 people have fled the western part of the city since the Iraqi army offensive to drive ISIL out began almost 3 weeks ago. Over 3,000 have arrived at a newly established camp at Chamoko, east of Mosul. Stephanie Decker is there.
They are emerging from almost 3 years of ISIL rule. and now a terrifying war. It's been a long and painful journey to get here.
We haven't slept in 3 days. We've been walking for about 30 or 35 kilometers. Truly, it feels like someone is taking revenge on us.
We are very tired and have suffered a lot these years, but thank God it's over.
People are fleeing Mosul in their thousands, and there are mixed emotions here.
Will you be able to go back to Mosul?
Well, Mosul is very damaged. It's very damaged. The life and the self is very damaged.
What goes through their minds as they wait? They're let off the buses one by one and given a quick security check.
The new arrivals are being registered, and what this means is that they are now officially homeless. The people have just arrived, at least 6 or 7 buses, and the stories that we're hearing are all of people saying they've had no food. Many don't know where their family members are. It is an unimaginable scale of human tragedy what is unfolding here.
Women and children are welcomed inside this tent. Small comforts for a colossal ordeal. We ask what life was like the last few years. Torturous, she tells us. Slowly, a picture emerges of living under ISIL rule.
They killed children and adults for no reason. They grabbed children like my son and asked them, "Why aren't you going to the mosque? If he wants to pray, he can pray at home. We are all Muslims. We are all slaves of God. Why does he have to go to the mosque?" That's ISIL.
What sin have these children committed to lose 3 years of their lives? My children were top of their class. Now they have lost 3 years. A whole generation has been destroyed. An entire generation.
It's easy to shed the superficial constrictions imposed by ISIL. Black face covering niqabs, which women were forced to wear, give way to color.
My wife lost. My people lost. My house is damaged.
It's the emotional scars, which will be much harder to fix. Stephanie Decker, Aljazeera, Chamakor camp, east of Mosul.
Early vote counting in India's state election shows big gains for the governing BJP. Uttar Pradesh has the biggest population, and a win for Prime Minister Narendra Modi's party there indicates strong support for his government of Hindu nationalists. The BJP is also in the lead in Uttarakhand. Final results are expected in a few hours' time. Hundreds of child soldiers have formally put down their arms in the Philippines. The Moro Islamic Liberation Front, the UN and the government held a ceremony to mark the event. The children have been presented with certificates of disengagement, indicating they'll no longer take part in military activity. Jamela Alindugan is in Lanao del Norte in the Philippines.
The Moro Islamic Liberation Front has committed to keep the children out of combat zones and to make sure that they are in school. Now, this has been a long process. This started more than 8 years ago. It required a lot of ground work, investigations, and research. It required a re-education, not just of Moro Islamic Liberation Front commanders, but also the parents of the children to understand that what may seem to be a normal situation is actually not. That this generation of children that have been disengaged today is actually 4th generation of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front. As we know, the Moro Islamic Liberation Front is the biggest armed group in Southeast Asia. It's been fighting for autonomy for the Moro people in the southern Philippines for over 40 years. But the peace process has been going on for more than 18 years. And although this may not be part of the main peace process with the Philippine government, this work of the United Nations is unprecedented and is expected to benefit this peace process, not only because it shows the commitment of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front to the decommissioning process, but also it sends a message to other armed groups in the country, like the National Democratic Front, the New People's Army, and of course the Moro National Liberation Front, that the importance of protecting children and making sure that children are not engaged in combat zones is actually an intricate part of the peace process with the Philippine government.
Polls are predicting nationalist anti-globalization candidates will do well in state elections in Western Australia this weekend. They want to slash immigration and introduce restrictions on Muslims. Andrew Thomas now reports.
The National Sustainable Living Festival in Melbourne attracts a certain crowd with certain views.
What are your political priorities?
The environment and the climate, gender equality and, refugees.
Climate change, number one, renewable energy.
Race, same-sex marriages and environment.
But here is not typical. West of Brisbane, the Queensland Drag Racing Championships attracts very different people.
I pay good money in taxes every week, and I've never seen any of it go to anything I've ever used.
Get too much on an immigration a bit around here. We do more for them and for our own people.
We're spending way too much on foreign aid when we should be helping the people here first.
At last July's national Senate elections, the mainstream Labour and Liberal parties got just 65% of the vote between them, by far the lowest percentage for many decades. Many voters are moving towards the political fringes. The nationalist One Nation party won 4 seats in the Senate last year, having never held any before. Its leader Pauline Hanson wants a crackdown on Muslim immigration and says she respects Vladimir Putin as a strong leader.
I'd be voting for One Nation for sure.
Probably Pauline Hanson with the One Nation party. She's got her head screwed on pretty good.
I think she's got some good policies.
She's got a bit more of a head on her shoulders than some of the blokes currently running the country.
But Australia is not about to see a One Nation government.
Australia has compulsory voting. It is illegal not to vote. That means simply firing up those who would otherwise stay home is not enough to win elections.
But fringe parties can take enough votes to stop mainstream ones from winning them. Those mainstream parties are changing policies as a result.
They've pulled both the major parties really towards a more hardline stance on immigration, on refugees, on multiculturalism.
One Nation is a particular threat to the right of centre Liberals. Labour is losing support their way too, and to the Greens.
I vote Green, yeah. I used to vote Labour.
I grew up in a family of kind of Labour voters and have switched over to the Greens.
Saturday's state election in Western Australia will signal how fractured Australian politics is becoming. Andrew Thomas, Aljazeera, Willowbank near Brisbane.
Now, it's still the most complete early human skeleton ever found, but 30 years after archaeologists unearthed the Turkana boy fossil in northern Kenya, the people who live near the site are yet to benefit. From Turkana, Catherine Soy has the story.
Asekon Loa keeps the key to the most important possession in her village. Most of the livestock here has died because of drought. So charging a small fee to enter this archaeological site is her only livelihood. Fossil hunters came here 3 decades ago and started digging right behind her house. That is where we kept our livestock. Our house was there as well. We had to move when they started their work, she says. The most complete early human skeleton ever found is called the Turkana boy. He was between 9 and 12 when he died about 1.6 million years ago.
In 1984, when archaeologists discovered the Turkana boy, this area was and remains isolated with very few villages around. Those who were here and witnessed the excavations say there was so much excitement and hope that it would pay off for them. Today they tell us they're disappointed.
There is no benefit here. It has lost meaning to us and made us angry. We don't know why this monument was brought here if it can't help us.
His remains are in a vault at the National Museum in Nairobi. It's a 2-day drive from Turkana. Villagers want him returned, or at least a replica displayed in a properly constructed museum, along with better roads to attract more visitors.
We will be encouraging youth and the people around the site to form guides, to build amenities where people who are coming to visit the site can be able to enjoy the site. And we think this one will spur both tourism and also livelihoods along these communities.
Scientists believe Turkana boy is related to all of us. He's said to have been intelligent and walked upright. Over the decades, many other fossils, including animals and ancient tools, have also been found in different parts of the country, making Kenyan archaeological sites crucial to the study of evolution.
So we know a lot about those particular sites.
we've built a wonderful story out of those particular sites, but there are still missing links that we feel that we need to fill.
In Turkana, ASECON says that on average, they only get one visiting group a month. Curators at the Nairobi Museum she's never been to tell us that the only way she can be helped is if Kenya's rich historical heritage is marketed more. Catherine Soy, Al Jazeera, Turkana, Northern Kenya.
This is Al Jazeera. These are the top stories. Opponents of South Korea's impeached president are demanding that she should be arrested a day after she was thrown out of office. In Seoul, thousands of people are also protesting in support of Park Geun-hye. The UN says the world is facing its worst humanitarian crisis in 70 years, with 20 million people at risk of starvation, many in areas of recent or current conflict. Parts of Yemen, South Sudan, Somalia and northeastern Nigeria are affected. The UN says it needs $4.4 billion by July to prevent famine.
We stand at a critical point in our history. Already at the beginning of the year, we are facing the largest humanitarian crisis since the creation of the United Nations. Now, more than 20 million people across 4 countries face starvation and famine. Without collective and coordinated global efforts, people will simply starve to death. Many more will suffer and die from disease. Children stunted and out of school. Livelihoods, futures and hope will be lost.
Hundreds of child soldiers have formally put down their weapons in the Philippines. The Moro Islamic Liberation Front, the UN and the government held a ceremony to mark the event. The children have been presented with certificates of disengagement, indicating they will no longer take part in military activity. They'll now be offered scholarships to finish their schooling. Early vote counting in India's state election shows big gains for the governing BJP. Uttar Pradesh has the biggest population, and a win for Prime Minister Narendra Modi's party there indicates strong support for his government of Hindu nationalists. The BJP is also in the lead in Uttarakhand. Final results are expected in a few hours' time. US President Donald Trump has invited the Palestinian leader Mahmoud Abbas to visit Washington last month. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made his first visit since Mr. Trump became president. A spokesman for Abbas says the president made the official invitation to discuss ways to resume the peace process. Lots more news whenever you want it on the website, aljazeera.com. Tweet me, I will tweet you back. I'm at PeterW1. I will see you in half an hour. Between now and then, it's the Listening Post. Bye-bye.